I loved you, James. Okay, I didn't expect that. And then we suddenly get these flashback panels that are just brilliant and beautiful, where we, in quick, silent panels, we see each of them young and beautiful in old-timey medieval garb as they once looked. And then we go back to her looking like this withered, gnarled zombie. And then she continues, but love wasn't enough. I needed power, immortality. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Comics Rot Your Brain, the show where screenwriters talk about the comic books that we love, mostly from the 1980s. I'm one of your hosts, I'm Steven Bagatourian, and my usual charming co-host, Chris Derrick, cannot be with us today, but never fear, Chris will return soon. But in the meantime, we are going to be venturing into one of the more obscure corners of 1980s comics, which is the relaunch of Archie Comics' superhero line, which they did under the banner of the Red Circle imprint. And we're going to take a look at a specific comic from that relaunch, which is Blue Ribbon Comics #2, featuring the origin of a character called Mr. Justice. And it's some pretty fascinating stuff here. And before we get into it, I should probably talk about the reasons why I wanted us to take a look at this particular comic here. And, you know, this might be a shorter episode than usual because it's really, you know, one issue. And I don't know that I have anything astonishingly deep to say, but I think this is just a fascinating curiosity in the world of comics. It's one of those comics that's never going to be reprinted. It's never going to be collected. It just sort of exists out there. And it happens to have been drawn by two absolute stone cold legends in my estimation. And I think in the estimation of most right-thinking comic fans. You got Trevor Von Eeden on pencils here, and you have Alex Niño on inks. Now, to anyone who's a loyal listener of Comics Rot Your Brain, and if you are, thank you so much. We appreciate every one of you. We appreciate all the comments. We appreciate the likes. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the show. But in the meantime, for those of you who have already been listening, then y'all know for sure that Alex Niño and Trevor Von Eeden are two of our favorites around here, and we're going to continue to make videos about all kinds of comics from both of them because these two guys epitomize the reasons why Chris and I wanted to start this show, because there are just so many fucking legendary comics from the 80s and so many legendary creators who just don't get anywhere near the shine, the flowers, the props, what have you. Insert your favorite slang that means appreciation. These guys and girls, men, women, they don't get the acclaim that they deserve if they didn't happen to produce Watchmen, Dark Knight, or Mouse, or Love and Rockets in the 80s. There are just so many incredible comics from the 80s, forgotten comics, half-finished series, attempts at launching a line that didn't quite go anywhere. And it's just something like this, where you just got a single issue, but for goodness sake, it's Alex Niño inking Trevor Von Eeden, something you're not going to find anywhere else. And I think for that reason alone, this deserves a video on YouTube, and it should be talked about and studied and put underneath a little bit of a magnifying glass. Now, Trevor Von Eeden, for those of you who have heard our deep dive on Thriller that Chris and I did, which is one of our first episodes of the show a couple of years back, and it's still one of my favorite episodes. It's our 4-hour discussion, I think 4 hours plus perhaps, of the Von Eeden and Fleming run on Thriller. And kind of an interesting detail, I suppose, also is that the team that took over for Von Eeden and Fleming on Thriller after they had kind of an acrimonious parting with DC Comics, first Fleming, then Von Eeden, both left under unfortunate circumstances. They were actually replaced by none other than Alex Niño on art and Bill Dubay on writing chores. And Bill Dubay happens to be the person who co-wrote this story today that also features Alex Niño and Trevor Von Eeden. So in a sense, this is kind of a weird reunion of 3/4 of the principal teams on Thriller. although I believe this happened first. So I don't think there's anything significant to it other than the fact that comics are a small world, and getting a gig in comics, I think, was very much like a game of musical chairs with only so many spots for everybody. Now, just before we get into this actual comic and the Red Circle line more so, I just want to talk about first Trevor Von Eeden here a little more, and then Alex Niño. So Trevor, as most of you probably already know, was the first Black artist ever hired at DC Comics, which is amazing. And he's the co-creator of Black Lightning. And he went on, of course, to draw the aforementioned Thriller over at DC, which he co-created with Robert Loren Fleming. And then Trevor did the Green Arrow miniseries written by Mike W. Barr with inks by Dick Giordano. And every time I say the name Dick Giordano now, I flash on a comment that we received on our Blue Devil video from either Dan Mishkin or Gary Cohn. It was one of them who commented and corrected the pronunciation that Chris and I were using for Dick Giordano. And they very kindly corrected us and said it should be pronounced Dick Giordano, not Giordano. And it's funny because I'm sure, of course, they're correct, but it doesn't sound right to me to not say Dick Giordano. So anyways, forgive me, Giordano family or any Italians out there. It's just really hard for me to change my pronunciation after all these decades. But having said that, back to the point, Trevor Von Eeden did Green Arrow with Dick Giordano. And Von Eeden also went on to do other stuff at DC, like a legendary Batman annual, I believe also written by Mike W. Barr, colored by Lynn Varley, famously pre-Dark Knight. And then Von Eeden went on to do just a bunch of other just cool fill-in issues on Batman and the Outsiders, and just various things he did for DC. He did a Black Canary limited series later. He did a run on Legends of the Dark Knight. Just, a bunch of stuff here and there. And Von Eden's one of my favorite artists of all time. And I think he was just an astonishingly original talent. And if you guys want to know more about that, you could certainly check out our Thriller episode, as well as the episode that we put out on a Trevor Von Eeden World's Finest comic story where he was drawing Superman and Batman. That was also fantastic stuff. So Von Eeden for me is he was not only like I said, the first Black artist at DC Comics. He was also, I believe, the youngest artist ever hired at DC. I think he was 17 when he was hired by them, and he co-created Black Lightning. He was literally a high school student. So just a truly extraordinary figure in comics history in every way. But on top of that, he was just an astonishingly inventive layout artist, and his panel layouts, his page designs, all that stuff was just highly singular. And he had an incredible level of just emotion and rawness that he injected into his art that was very, very rare for that time. Almost an unfinished quality, particularly when he was inking himself. And that's something I wanted to touch on here, is that Von Eeden did not ink himself that much, at least not at DC Comics. I don't know that he was given the opportunity to, frankly. Certainly coming in as a 17-year-old, he would not have had the opportunity to call those shots. And unfortunately for him, when he came in at 17, the inker that was assigned to him was the infamous Vinnie Coletta. And I know that there is some debate in the circles of fandom over Vinnie Coletta, but I think it's fairly minimal debate. I think there are some folks pushing back on the idea that Vinnie Coletta was a uniquely terrible inker, or was incredibly dastardly and awful in his ruining of Jack Kirby's pencils in many people's estimations, and certainly the fact that Coletta famously erased huge portions of Kirby's backgrounds, and Coletta also just, famously was getting hired because he could ink really quick and met deadlines and did what he had to do to finish the job. And, we don't need to get into a huge tangent on Vinnie Coletta, but as I was doing research for this episode, I did find Trevor speaking on Coletta on a blog from a while ago. Looks to be a Green Arrow blog, where Trevor did an interview on this place called trickarrows.blogspot.com. So thank you to them for this very nice interview. And I just thought this would be of interest since we're talking about Trevor being inked by other artists. And this is Trevor commenting on his thoughts on being inked by Vinnie Coletta. So Trevor says, to say that I was dissatisfied with Vinnie Coletta's inks over my pencils is to redefine the word understatement. I absolutely hated what he did to my work. Ever since my debut on Black Lightning, his heavy-handed style was in complete contrast to my fine-lined and fairly delicate penciled drawings. And were it not for the fact that I totally enjoyed drawing comics, I'd have become and remained horribly depressed after seeing the published version of his inks on my work. In the early years of my career, I seldom saw the inks before the issues were published. Fortunately, at that point, I was always busy learning and developing my art as I worked on the various jobs I was given, so I managed to forget what Coletta had done and lose myself in whatever I was working on. The only artist whose work I liked after Coletta's inks was the great and inimitable Jack Kirby. But then again, Jack's work was impossible to ink badly. Nevertheless, I did like the light feathering that Coletta added to Jack's bold, slashing, confident lines. It provided an interesting contrast and an oddly likable softening to the larger-than-life power and beauty of his visuals. But even then, Coletta's notorious habit of omitting and or obfuscating elements of the art, usually backgrounds, was still at work. Fortunately for me and all of comicdom, it is literally impossible to ink Jack Kirby's work badly. It was simply that good, or rather, that great. So that's an awesome quote from Trevor Von Eeden there, and kind of an interestingly nuanced take on Coletta's inking. Trevor obviously extremely upset about what Coletta did to his work, but somehow finding an appreciation for what Coletta did with Kirby's work, while acknowledging the things that people are also quite upset about with Coletta inking Kirby. So that's fascinating, and that's probably a topic better left for another episode, just with the idea of Vinnie Coletta. Is he a great inker? Is he a wonderfully underrated company man who got the job done on time, made sure the comics came out on time? Or is he a nefarious villain in the history of comics who robbed us of a significant percentage of Jack Kirby drawings and style? I would probably fall more in that latter camp, but like I say, that's not what we need to talk about at length today anyways. Point being, Trevor was inked by Coletta at the beginning of his career. Trevor went on to be inked by a lot of other very noteworthy figures in comics history. Trevor at different times was inked by people like, and this is an incomplete list, but he was inked by Pablo Marcos, the legendary Pablo Marcos. He was inked by David Lloyd of V for Vendetta fame. This was on a little backup story for Pacific Comics anthology called Bold Adventure, where they did a story called The Weirdling. And I believe Lloyd only inked one part of it, but they made a very nice team, although Lloyd's inks were somewhat overpowering in my estimation, but Trevor's layouts were still just exquisite. And Trevor was also inked by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez on that Batman Legends of the Dark Knight story that Trevor did at one point toward the end of his time at DC Comics. And Trevor, on his later issues of Thriller, was inked by none other than Dick Giordano, who also inked Trevor on the aforementioned Green Arrow series. So these are some incredible, legendary figures that Trevor collaborated with, and that's really cool to see. And having said all that, perhaps my favorite inker on Von Eeden, I have to say, if I'm being honest, ultimately at the end of the day, my favorite Trevor Von Eeden inker really has to be Trevor Von Eeden, because I feel like the early issues of Thriller, where Von Eeden was inking himself, are just the most original distillation of his vision and kind of the preservation of this raw vitality that to me was just so fascinating, along with the clearly just really well studied and well thought out panel layouts and characters and knowledge that he was bringing to everything else. Something about Trevor inking himself to me was just it was the apex of Von Eden's work. And he would go on to, of course, ink himself in other places as well. But we're focused here primarily on his output in the 80s because, that's kind of our bailiwick. That's kind of what we do on the show. Having said all of that, that brings us to the person inking Trevor in the comic book at question here. And yes, I promise we're going to get to Blue Ribbon Comics #2 here. The person inking Trevor here is none other than the amazing, transcendent artist who we have really devoted at least one long video to on this channel, and I'm sure we're going to be returning to his work over and over again. Alex Niño, the Filipino artist who is the definition of just a genius. And I think much like Trevor himself, Niño's work is without easy comparison. It is a combination of things that you rarely find in one artist, but Niño is absolutely just one of the all-time greats in the history of comics. So to see him collaborating with Trevor Von Eeden on a comic like this, for me, I just felt like, someone needs to look at this comic and talk about it and sort of memorialize it for all time, because it's such a unique collaboration. And so who is this character? Who is this character that they're collaborating on here? Well, I will tell you, his name is Mr. Justice. And this character, he's known as the Royal Wraith. That's another nickname for this character. And he's in a long line of characters of a certain type, perhaps starting with DC Comics' The Spectre. So I'm going to read to you guys here a little bit from a website called Toonopedia, from somebody named Don Markstein. And Don Markstein's Toonopedia page has a very nice entry on Mr. Justice that I want to quote a little bit from here. Mr. Justice belongs to a genre of stories that's as old as storytelling itself. Dead men who return to wreak vengeance upon their foes. In comic books, this genre is found not just in series characters like Swamp Thing, but also in a vast number of non-series stories from Easy Comics and the like. Though this motif is most familiar in the form of a horror story, it's also found in quite a few superheroes. The best known of them is DC Comics' The Spectre. And that character had not been out of his grave for more than a year before MLJ Comics, remember MLJ, later to become Archie Comics, followed suit with one of its own. Mr. Justice debuted in Blue Ribbon Comics #9 in February 1941. Instantly displacing Richie the Amazing Boy, not one of your standout characters, and Rangatang the Wonder Dog, obviously derived from Rin Tin Tin. From the cover position, Mr. Justice went on to become, temporarily at least, one of MLJ's biggest stars. The Royal Wraith, as he was sometimes called, was in fact Prince James of England, lured to his death by Scottish rebels in the year 1040. He murdered them back, but afterward his destiny thwarted. His spirit was trapped in the castle where all of this took place. And in 1940, the castle was dismantled and shipped to America, where it was to be reassembled, but the ship carrying it was sunk by a Nazi submarine. James's spirit was thus released into the modern world. He then reassumed corporeal form, took on the Mr. Justice moniker, and love interest being de rigueur for a 1940 superhero he picked up with an American woman named Pat Clark. And the story at that time was written by MLJ regular Joe Blair, drawn by Sam Cooper, both of whom stayed with Mr. Justice through most of his run. And a major villain throughout Mr. Justice's sojourn in the mortal realm was none other than Satan himself. So Mr. Justice was he was busy. He was busy in the 1940s there, but then he kind of disappeared and didn't really have a lot going on in comics for quite a while. He was, again, part of this early group of heroes, but he lost the cover spot in Blue Ribbon #19, December 1941. He hung around kind of in the back pages of some of these MLJ comics for another couple of years. But then he basically was gone once Archie Andrews and Jughead, Betty and Veronica and the gang took over as the new stars at the company. Mr. Justice sort of disappeared for a couple decades. He came back for a few issues in the 1960s and became part of a group of heroes known as the Mighty Crusaders, which was, the Archie heroes trying to be relaunched there. And then once again in the 80s with this Red Circle relaunch, he came back and just, we caught a brief glimpse of him. And this brief glimpse is what brings us to our story today. And so let's just take a gander at what we have on these pages here, and I'm gonna try to just read y'all a little bit of the story and give you a sense of it. So Blue Ribbon Comics #2, it was sold for $1.50, which, trust me, was actually quite a bit of money back in 1983, because most comics cost about half that much, maybe even less than half that much back in 1983. I think you were looking at Marvel DC Comics around 65 cents, if I'm not mistaken. So for a comic to be $1.50 over double the price of the big two at that time. This was a comic that was setting some high expectations in fans, and Red Circle Comics Group. Well, you better deliver at 150 back in 1983. My goodness, what were these kids made of money? So it all starts under a cover by Rich Buckler, and Rich Buckler was kind of the sort of figurehead running this company, running this relaunch. Robin Snyder was involved also behind the scenes, but I think Rich Buckler was really one of the prime movers and shakers behind this Archie Comics Red Circle imprint being relaunched in the 80s. And Rich Buckler, of course, is primarily known as a Marvel Comics artist in the 70s and 80s, and conflicting opinions about his work. But he was definitely a solid professional when it came to being an artist, and was guy had worked on Deathlock and worked on a lot of books for Marvel. But at the end of the day, he was not really known as an editor. And I think this was his shot at getting to kind of run a superhero line on his own. And, like we say, it didn't really turn out that well. And the whole Red Circle imprint, this relaunch went kablooey within a couple of years. But I got to give it up to Rich Buckler for one thing. He really did assemble a genuine murderer's row of artists to relaunch this superhero line for Archie. I mean, a lot of these artists were not necessarily spring chickens, but they were stone cold legends. You had people like Gray Morrow and Carmine Infantino, and of course Alex Niño, but also Alex Toth, and a lot of other folks here that were just really noteworthy artists. Jim Steranko, Steve Ditko, and they worked on the Fly relaunch for Red Circle. And Jim Sherman, a much younger artist at the time, he drew the first couple issues of the Fly. A guy who would also draw a bunch of Legion of Superheroes over at DC, and a pretty terrific artist, honestly, very, very underrated. Jim Sherman, we're going to be covering him in another episode in the near future. But Buckler, as an artist, certainly had a tremendous eye for artists and talent. And, not all of the artists were as great as the ones I just mentioned, but I mean, that group alone is pretty impressive. So you got to give it up for that. And, on the writing front, that's where maybe the Red Circle relaunch could have perhaps done a little better. That's where I think some of the line might have really fallen down. But in this particular issue, we've got Robin Snyder and Bill Dubay co-writing this Mr. Justice story. They're co-writing it and editing it. That's what the credit says. So it's written and edited by Snyder and Dubay, art by Trevor Von Eeden and Alex Niño, lettering by somebody whose signature I cannot read, and I have no idea who lettered this. And it's kind of it's a very odd signature. It's just a couple of characters that I just can't make heads or tails of. And if someone knows who lettered this issue and you want to maybe educate me in the comments, I'd appreciate it. The lettering looks good, but who knows who did it? It's colored by B. Grossman. And I will say that B. Grossman, whose work I'm also not really familiar with, made some very bold choices in the coloring here. It's got some very lurid and gaudy colors going on, published on this newsprint paper back in the day. And I got to say, I actually kind of like it. I dig it. I dig the coloring. I think it's very attention-getting coloring. And it's, at times it's borderline ugly. And there's some wild choices made with the coloring, but there's also times where it's actually really powerful and just really pops. I mean, page after page, I was just like, damn, those are some colors. Those are some choices. Those are some real, like, freaking major coloring choices. So yeah, honestly, I'm saying that not to be facetious. I actually really did enjoy the coloring. It's just, it really pops. So yeah, that's the team. That's the creative team we got here. And let me just read you a little bit of the, what I would call perhaps some purple prose that is being used to tell this story. But like with a lot of these 80s comics, the density of the storytelling, I think, ultimately, if you give into it, is part of the experience. And I'd rather have these super dense, hyper compressed 80s stories any day of the week over a modern comic from the last 25 years where you can be done with the comic in 3 minutes and you're out $5. I think these old comics, they'd cracked the code. They had the formula of how to make monthly comics and how to make a floppy issue a complete experience that was actually worthwhile. And even if you were charging $1.50, a whole $1.50 back then, I mean, shit, you got a lot for that money. And, 65 cents, 75 cents at Marvel and DC. Okay, $1.50 at Red Circle. Let's see what they got. All right, the story opens with a police officer somewhere, looks like at a bank. And, we're actually, no, someone's being interrogated, and we're flashing back. I think, this cop, the police officer, is being interrogated somewhere. We don't see where yet, but we're beginning in this flashback, and a word balloon from off panel says, "Tell us again, Samuels, from the beginning." And so then this cop ostensibly is recounting what happened when he was, a security guard. It looks like a cop, but he's a security guard at a bank. And so he says, "Like I told Detective Blaine, Commissioner, it was almost closing time. There were only a few customers left in the bank. I guess I was getting tired after another long, boring day." And there's a panel of the cop yawning, or the security guard's yawning. And then all of a sudden, there's a really wild panel of these two masked gunmen with shotguns and ski masks. And it's a crazy tilted Dutch angle of these guys just barging into the bank. And the coloring is quite dramatic. These guys are colored entirely red, and the background is mostly blacked out behind them with a little pop of yellow and blue, but it's very striking. And the visual as these robbers are barging in, it just grabs you, kind of assaults you. And then the cop, the fucking security guard. Why do I keep calling him a cop? It's because he looks like a cop. I'm looking. Comics is a visual medium. I'm looking at him. It looks like a police officer. He is a security guard. All right. The security guard, he says, "Suddenly, these guys in ski masks come bursting through the doors. They were fast. They were sure of themselves, moving like real pros. Before I could clear my holster, one of the scum butt stroked me in the face." Oh my goodness, I forgot about that phrase. Man, I love comics. I don't know if I've ever read that sentence in my life, and I'm pretty sure I probably never will read it again. "Before I could clear my holster, one of the scum butt stroked me in the face." Oh man. Shit. Go comics. All right, what we're actually referring to is being pistol whipped, or would we say shotgun whipped, by the butt of the rifle. That's what's happening in the panel. As one of these crooks is he's just bashing the security guard in the chin with the butt of his rifle, or I guess you could say the scum is butt stroking him in the face. All right, so that's what happens there. And then now we get some dialogue. First, word balloons here from the robbers themselves, and they're yelling, "Wallets and pocketbooks now!" And then we go back to the cop's memory. "I went down hard, shaking, bleeding, my head swimming on the fringes of consciousness. I heard several of the women scream as they shoved everyone against the wall." And then we hear one of the innocent bystanders here being taken hostage. And she says, "Please, I got 3 kids. I need..." And then we get a close-up panel on the gritted teeth of one of these robbers. And we get another extreme close-up on just the barrel of the shotgun staring right at us, with the eyes behind the ski mask of the robber holding the shotgun pointed right at us. Okay, right at us. Everything I just read, you guys, that's page 1. That's what I'm talking about here. Hyper compressed. That's all page 1. You turn the page and bloom, which is a really odd sound effect for a shotgun. It's not boom. It's not blam. It's bloom. Like you almost expect a bunch of flowers to pop up all of a sudden, or, like bloom in all caps with an exclamation point. I wonder if that's on purpose, or if that's the letterer just accidentally adding an L there. I don't know. Either way, I love it. So it says that sound effect, and then the caption, there's no drawing really here in this panel, just a sound effect. The caption on the next page says, "I should have seen it coming. I should have known that those butchers wanted to make an example out of anyone who dared defy them." It's pretty articulate security guard, very, I don't know, very literary the way he talks. Um, those butchers, I should have known they wanted to make an example out of anyone who dared defy them. Something inside me screamed as the shotgun exploded inches from Mr. Menudo's face. Mr. Menudo. Okay. This would have been 83. I'm guessing this is right around the time that Menudo was a really big boy band. I mean, I don't know, but I don't know if that's where Bill Dubay or Robin Snyder got the got the last name of that character there. But I mean, who can really say? It's 80s comics, could be. So the shotgun exploded inches from Mr. Menudo's face, and then we see one of the robbers with his eyes all big, looking shocked, smoke coming out of the barrel of the shotgun, and this robber says, or no, the caption says, "And my soul turned to ice at the thought of his shotgun body twitching in a pool of warm, oozing blood. But when I looked up, I saw that Menudo's 3 kids still had a father. It was one of the holdup men who fell with a cavity in his back exuding raw, bloody hamburger." All right. That's one way to say someone gets shot. I can't even explain what happened then. I don't know if it was an accident, premeditated, or some fanatic cult holding us at bay, forcing us to witness their suicidal ritual. Bam, bam, pow, pow, ba-dam, bow, pow, crack, bam, bam, chow. Chow? So suddenly all the robbers start shooting each other, and suddenly instead of 2 robbers, it looks like there's like suddenly 4 or 5 of them. And they just start shooting each other over the course of like 3 kind of small panels here, and we're seeing all this craziness happening and these crazy sound effects like crack, bam, badam, chow. I've never ever seen the word chow, CHOW, as a sound effect on a gunshot. Like, what are we smoking here? Bloom and chow? What the fuck are these sound effects? Anyways, I don't mean to question a professional letterer who has no name that I can decipher. But yeah, those are some crazy sound effects. And then he goes on here to say, terrified, screaming, gibbering men insanely turn their guns on themselves, shrieking about invisible fangs and claws and tentacles, and how they had to destroy them or be destroyed. It all happened so feverishly fast in the veritable blink of an eye. There were only 2 of them standing. Again, like, wow, this security guard at the bank, man, he should be writing short fiction or something. In the veritable blink of an eye, there were only 2 of them standing. Like, this guy, man, he can tell a story. And then one of the robbers is saying, Eddie? Oh God, Eddie? What have we done? It seems to be the one device that Bill Dubay and Robin Snyder really like to connote shock from their characters, is just to have them stuttering. There's a lot of stuttering in these first few pages. And the one called Eddie was trying desperately to shove his spilling guts back into the gaping hole in his midsection. Eddie? Oh God, your stomach! Abruptly, as though realizing the futility of the gesture, he suddenly stiffened. Oh, wait, this is still the security guard talking. I keep thinking this is like narration because it's so florid. I keep thinking it's like 3rd person point of view, just sort of like omniscient narration, but it's not. This is still the fucking security guard just talking in this unbelievably literary fashion. So the security guard goes on to say, abruptly, as though realizing the futility of the gesture, he suddenly stiffened, his eyes glassing over, he slumped forward, dead before he hit the floor. But that part of him left standing looked as though it had oozed from the pits of hell. And this is where we get our first glimpse of Mr. Justice himself. Yes, that's right, folks. The Royal Wraith finally makes an appearance here on page 3 of his own comic. The Royal Wraith shows up toward the end, and we realize that he has somehow possessed the bodies of these bank robbers. And he's possessed apparently each of their bodies in quick succession, causing these dastardly gunmen to turn their firearms on each other in this crazy melee that we just witnessed. You know, bam, pow, badam, chow, bloom. Amidst that melee, he possessed these guys and their bodies, got them all to just shoot each other. Pretty brutal justice from Mr. Justice here, gotta say. So now we go to page 4, where we have just a stunning page where we get a full page illustration of Mr. Justice's face And he's like a bald white guy with what looks like I don't know, like a just a bunch of like squiggly dark lines all across his cranium coming down onto what would be his eyebrows, and he's got just blank white eyes, and he's got the visage and sort of the complexion of like a zombie, I suppose. He's extremely pale, looks very ghost-like, and he's whatever he is. He's very old. He's many, many centuries old. And so the security guard's going on to describe this guy, and he says, it just stood there cold as ice, staring at the lone surviving butcher. That would be the surviving bank robber. And there was death in its eyes, and when it spoke, its whisper was like a vice, slowly strangling the core of your soul. I love this security guard. I feel like the security guard should be one of the EC Comics horror hosts back in the 50s. Like this guy, like he knows how to spin a chilling yarn. So now we got more stuttering. The security, the bank robber, he's stuttering. He's a gibbering mess. He's saying, no, stay away, stay away, stay away. And then, come, traveler, gaze into my eyes. See within the eternity which awaits you. I think that's Mr. Justice talking. Come, traveler, gaze into my eyes. Yeah, see, it's got to be. See within the eternity which awaits you. And it's just stay away. And so ultimately there we have the robber at that moment. Hold on here 1 second. Okay. So ultimately here we have the robber. We're not quite sure what happens to him. Like his hands kind of are there, but the rest of him seems to disappear. It's kind of an unclear series of panels, but it looks like he's sort of disappearing. And then the security guard voiceover continues. The captions continue. It didn't touch the man. I swear on my mother's memory, it simply stood and stared, and that killer withered, his body smoldering, melting into a lump of putrid, steaming flesh, emitting the stench of a 3-week rotted corpse. It sparked with a final screaming surge of life, then lay silent, a ghoulish puddle of liquid human gore. And then we see Mr. Justice's reflection upside down in this exact ghoulish puddle of liquid human gore, which is what he has just reduced this final robber to. And so now we turn the page again to page 5, and we see that this security guard's been talking to the police commissioner of all people, and he concludes by saying, I swear, Commissioner, it sounds crazy, but every word is true. And then the question comes, perhaps from the commissioner off panel, just where is this thing now? It disappeared. One minute it was there, the next it was gone. And the commissioner says, Lieutenant, take Samuels and any of the other witnesses willing to corroborate his story to the station and send the meat packers back to clean up this mess. Commissioner! And so now here, the commissioner kind of appears to maybe turn the corner from where he's been doing this interrogation, and it's none other than Mr. Justice himself waiting to talk to the commissioner wherever we are at this moment. It's not entirely clear. We're maybe in a police station, but the way that the framing of these panels is done, it's quite claustrophobic. We don't really get a external establishing shot of anything, so it's kind of hard to know for sure. Maybe we're still at the bank. God knows where we are. It's all very, very claustrophobic, very close-up shots on everyone. So the commissioner says his line about cleaning up the mess, and then we hear Commissioner, and he turns and he sees Mr. Justice himself. And so the commissioner sees, our guy, the Royal Wraith, looking all ghostly and, mysterious looking in a beautifully drawn panel by Von Eeden and Niño here, just gorgeous line work. And the commissioner, who's got kind of an old-timey little mustache and looks grumpy, he yells, Mr. Justice, I might have known. Couldn't you have at least left one of them alive? Let me guess. You made them all see some kind of nightmarish monstrosities. That's why they turned on one another, blowing themselves to hell. And then he says, He says, blast it, how am I going to explain this to the media without letting on that there's a 500-year-old homicidally maniacal ghost running loose, taking the law into his own murderous hands? And here comes Mr. Justice with his worldview. He responds, your laws coddle wrongdoers, Commissioner. I am solely interested in justice. And with that, he's gone. Very Batman-like. He disappears. No time for the commissioner's bullshit. Mr. Justice is out the fucking window. He's flying off into the night sky in a perhaps hastily composed panel, because it looks like it was drawn maybe rather quickly, but still beautifully. And just Mr. Justice with a very minimally sketched out series of buildings behind him is out the window. And, this is actually one of the reasons I like looking at comics like this is it's not anyone's masterwork. It's far from a masterwork for Von Eeden or Niño. It's really just a bit of a footnote in each of their careers. But boy, is this just a phenomenal footnote. And it's just such a cool thing to see a couple of guys who are world-class talents having to just kind of, no doubt, bang out a story to meet a deadline because, this was a gig for the month. And so some of the panels, you can tell they took a lot of time on, and other panels, it looks like, yeah, maybe they took a few minutes on. But it's still like you're in the hands of these just masterful artists. And a lot of times I really enjoy seeing the tossed off work of some of these artists, because even just in the most minimal gestural drawing, it's like a convention sketch. You still see something just beautiful and also like oftentimes even more alive, because they're making these really quick choices. They don't have time to second guess or, belabor these decisions. So yeah, this is just it's a beautiful comic. And you see this on page after page, and some panels are stronger than others. Some pages are stronger than others, but I think that's okay. That's part of what I love about the idea of monthly comics and the grind of monthly comics is that it forces so many artists and writers to just get past their inner critic and their inner censor. And you just got to make a choice because you got to get the pages out. And I feel like that kind of necessity being the mother of invention has been one of the awesome things about the grind of comics, and like there's a lot of things that suck about the grind of comics, but I think on just that one specific note, there's something cool about just putting a creative person in a little bit of a box or on a little bit of a hamster wheel where you get just this output that has to come out that otherwise may not come out or may be noodled on endlessly. And so here we see just really, really cool, very just fascinating series of quick decisions made storytelling wise. And as Mr. Justice leaves and he flies off here, we see him thinking to himself, Commissioner Burke is distraught. His daughter has been missing for nearly 3 months. If only I could help him find her, but my powers are waning daily. Never have I felt so inexplicably weak. Either something is draining my life force, or my time within the material world is at long last coming to an end. Okay, and then from there we actually switch perspectives and go back to the commissioner, and we have a great page where Von Eeden has a bunch of little panels, something Von Eeden was quite well known for, a lot of little panels and a lot of negative space. Two things that you didn't necessarily see a lot of in mainstream comics back then, but two things that Trevor Von Eeden excelled at were just sort of like what I would call kind of these micro panels where you would get the story being told in these very, very small but just beautifully composed panels, and then sometimes with a large amount of negative space where the panels were kind of just floating in these empty backgrounds. And honestly, the only other artist of note who I can remember really doing this consistently and also to great effect, and this is going to be an odd comparison to those of you who know the artist, but it would be Chester Brown on Yummy Fur, the 80s indie comic that came out of Vortex. And Yummy Fur was one of the more notable critically acclaimed indie comics. Very weird comic, very creative comic, very imaginative comic. But one thing that Chester Brown did is he would have his panels kind of floating in like a sea of black or sometimes a sea of white, but it would just be these panels just floating with nothingness all around them. And I think for Brown, as I recall, part of that came out of his workflow where he would actually draw every panel on a separate page of typing paper. And he would then like reduce or cut out the images and then assemble them together almost like a scrapbook onto one page, but he was drawing each of the panels separately as almost like just a separate thing and then putting them all together. And he drew it Yummy for, I believe, always on typing paper rather than Bristol board. It was a whole thing. It was part of his process. But Von Eeden here is drawing, one would imagine, on the official DC Comics Bristol board. So he's not doing it for that reason, but he's just making this artistic choice to have all these little panels with an uncommon amount of negative space around them. And for me, he actually chooses it very intentionally and very well. And for example, on this page that I'm talking about here, we go to the commissioner. The commissioner's got all these thought balloons where he's saying, look at me, I'm exhausted, disheartened, depressed, and I'm taking it all out on him. I should be grateful. He's devised a criminal justice system that works. Well, all I can think about is Lisa. I just can't accept that she's gone. Why hasn't she tried to contact me? The only clue we've had is one linking her to that bizarre suicide cult. But I can't believe that she'd ever. And so then we kind of leave the commissioner and we go to Mr. Justice flying across the sky, who's also having these very reflective thoughts. And Mr. Justice is saying, the more my powers wane, the more my past life haunts me. My spiritual awareness is trying to warn me that whatever is now occurring is something linked to my own distant past. Perhaps there, in what has gone before, I will find the answers I seek. Now, that's a little bit of a writing cheat, I would say. Like, just the idea of my spiritual awareness is trying to warn me that whatever's occurring now is somehow linked to my own distant past. Sounds to me like Bill Dubay and Robin Snyder need an excuse to launch into the old Mr. Justice origin story right here. So they need to come up with some bullshit about my spiritual awareness is causing my spidey sense to tingle. Let's talk about my origin and how all of this happened to create Mr. Justice centuries ago. This is comics though, and these are some very depressed, very somber adult characters, and I don't know who this line of comics was for in 1983. I mean, this is presaging what would be the grim and gritty era of comics, really, because this is pre-Dark Knight, pre-Watchmen, Vertigo comics, pre everything, pre the Punisher. I mean, pre Punisher's own miniseries. I mean, this is before comics really got grim and gritty, and certainly we weren't expecting that from Archie Comics. So I don't know. It's just a fascinating calculation on the part of Rich Buckler and Robin Snyder and Bill Dubay that this is what they surmised. I suppose they were making this for the direct market, which was in its early years, and they were thinking, hey, this is a more adult audience. And I guess this is what they were trying to serve them, is these more adult superhero stories, which as we go further into the story, we're going to see it gets even darker. I mean, we're just getting started here. I mean, we're hearing a little talk of a bizarre suicide cult and, and we know Mr. Justice's, one of his arch villains was in fact Satan. So this is not exactly Blue Devil. It's not a fun romp. This is far from it. Mr. Justice is some dark, heavy stuff here. So, so we're going to move forward here and see what we got. To everybody listening to this show, if you're enjoying the show, let me just remind y'all one more time that we have a members only section of videos. And if you want to support the channel, probably the best thing you can do after you've subscribed and after you like all of our videos is just, reach into the old pocketbook for $2.99 a month, and you'll get a whole bunch of bonus videos that are members only exclusives. And we're going to be adding to that catalog of members only videos over the coming months. And it's the best way you can support this channel. Just become a member on YouTube. We'd really appreciate it. And, we got some very cool stuff in store, including some surprising interviews on the horizon. So stay tuned to the channel for interviews with some extremely noteworthy persons from the world of comics in the 1980s. All right. Having said that, let's get back to Mr. Justice here in Blue Ribbon Comics number 2. Okay, so we pick up our story here with Mr. Justice flying off through the sky here on page 6, and his spiritual awareness is trying to warn him that all this stuff happening is somehow linked to his own distant past. So he goes on in thought balloons to have a reminiscence here, a series of reminiscences where he says in his own mind here, he's thinking, Perhaps there, in what has gone before, I will find the answers I seek. In but the fleeting span of a heartbeat, the Royal Wraith becomes a thread in the complex tapestry of time. And now suddenly he's flashing back with sort of his own specter-like, presence over his own past. And he's going centuries into the past, and he's kind of looming there in the trees, looking down on himself, riding on a horse with a woman. And he says here, as he's watching from the trees, "There I ride with the sole love of my existence, the pure and fragile Esmeralda. Even now her beauty plagues me. How I long to take her in my arms." He's a romantic. He's a romantic. This royal wraith of vengeance. He's still, after all these centuries, you got to respect a guy still being a romantic like this. And so he goes on here through these series of flashbacks, and the captions tell us, "The pain of what might have been slashes his very soul. The tortured wraith can look upon his lover's visage no longer. He knows it is easier to return to Castle Firth to witness the treachery of his own inevitable downfall." And all three of those sentences have exclamation points at the end of each of them. So I'm trying to convey that intensity for y'all. And so here we see him being betrayed back in the day. Someone appears to be attacking him. Actually, several someones are stabbing him, and they're yelling, "Die, die, Bonnie Prince James." And he yells out, "Hawks, Macduff, no!" And now Prince Richard is sole heir to England's throne. So we got kind of a little et tu, Brute, kind of a Caesar betrayal situation going on here. And going on through this little journey through history, the caption says, "Because of his scheming brother's assassins, he was cheated of his destiny to rule the greatest empire the world had ever known. For that reason, and that reason solely, his spirit was cursed with eternal unrest, destined to forever roam the halls of the castle he'd called his home." And now we see his spirit actually rising from his fallen corpse, and his spirit looks pretty freaking creepy here in this panel. He's going to be haunting the castle, and so that's what's going on here. And over the next page, we see for 5 interminable centuries, he wandered. We're spanning 5 centuries in one panel, by the way, for those of you following at home. One fairly small panel. We're spanning 5 interminable centuries. So he's wandering, a prisoner in spectral form. There he'd remain to this day, if not for the droning of invading German Luftwaffe. How do you pronounce that? I don't know. I'm not a World War II expert. German Luftwaffe above his native lands. As the mad dogs of war were released upon England, the Home Ministry formulated plans to preserve his castle as a historical treasure. So his fortress was dismantled stone by precious stone, loaded aboard a vessel bound for the safe shores of America. And we see all this happening. And though the form of his prison had been altered, the prince's weary spirit remained entombed within. So this is an interesting concept, only in comics. So the spirit has been, he's been cursed to haunt the halls of his castle, but this castle has been dismantled stone by stone and is being shipped off to America. And somehow the spirit is being transported with these disassembled stones, like his essence remains in these packages of stones that are being loaded onto a ship. I don't want to think about it too hard, but I think that's basically the concept here. And so the form of his prison altered. The prince's weary spirit remained entombed within these packing crates. As ever, his rest was fitful, made more so by what he alone could foresee. The Akashic records of the spheres foretold that not a stone of his beloved castle was then destined to reach the colonies. And now we see the freighter on the water that was transporting the castle to the shores of America gets blown up by what appears to be some kind of a submarine attack. And I think we find out it's Nazi submarines here. And it's a series of very evocative panels. We see the ship being hit and going down and disappearing into the water. And the caption reads, after a few silent panels, instead it was to remain upon the seabed, never again to be disturbed by the petty forces of man. Every single sentence on this page has an exclamation point. This is this is absolute peak comic book writing with peak hysteria and peak purple prose. This is like the love child of Don McGregor and Stan Lee, and the kind of style that Alan Moore would take and sort of make his own with less exclamation points and perhaps a more artful formulation of sentences. But I don't mean to be overly critical, though, because I'm actually enjoying the story and I enjoy kind of the florid purple prose of it all. But I'm just trying to convey the incredible intensity of all these exclamation points, one after another after another. It's exciting shit that's happening. I think that's the idea. So here we go. Here's another page where everything's an exclamation point. And this is a fucking gorgeous page. You'll see this in our video. It's the page where Mr. Justice is flying off into the sky in kind of a Jesus Christ pose with his arms outstretched. It's kind of a quasi full page spread almost. It's a half page spread, but it's gorgeous. And so here we see the water, like a close-up on the water for 3 panels before the Royal Wraith is freed from his watery prison here. And so the panels say, and yet, though his prison was more secure than ever, the guardians of karmic destiny decreed that the restless soul of a would-be king had suffered more than sufficiently. I don't know who the guardians of karmic destiny are, who made this decree. But again, let's not think about it too hard because, comics. So deep within the closing darkness of a watery grave. Yeah, see, what did I say? Watery grave. The spectral chains of eternal imprisonment were loosened. His mind whirled dizzily at the sudden unexpected release. Every ethereal fiber of his being tingled as though suddenly charged with living bolts of raw electrical energy. Up from the depths of the dark water, from the depths of his own despairing hopelessness, he soared, bursting utterly, totally, gloriously free after 5 tormenting centuries of imprisonment. It's a long time. It's a long time, folks. 500 years of imprisonment. And now here we actually do get a full page, more or less, with a couple of small inset panels of Mr. Justice flying off into the sky with kind of a nuclear hot pink, hot orange background behind him. Shout out to, what's his name? B. Grossman or whoever on colors here. These are some wild color choices, but I love it. I love it all. Go Red Circle Comics. The past dissolves and the spectral entity reemerges in the ever-unfolding present as confused as ever, despite his timeless journey. The answer he seeks for the puzzling loss of his spiritual powers continues to elude his probing grasp, yet even as his mind desperately reaches for an answer, a gentle vision, an image of a troubled innocent assails his battered senses. It is the powerful visage of a child, hopelessly lost in inner torment, a child whose life, whose very soul is somehow connected to his own, connected, he knows, to his inevitable spiritual destruction if he cannot somehow untangle the threads of that connection. Now he's thinking to himself, Lisa? Can the child be the commissioner's missing daughter? No, somehow I sense she's not. Yet I must discover who she is and why she presents such a grave danger to us both, while I yet have the powers to do so. And then here we cut to the police commissioner again, going home in a series of very kind of creepy looking panels. And the captions read, both loneliness and frustration wear upon the dedicated man called the commissioner. Again, every sentence has an exclamation point at the end, which is just wild. The commissioner also looking very dashing, although for some reason his face has been colored purple and pink. He's got some crazy lighting apparently in the hallways of his home here. He looks purple and pink, and he's got kind of a debonair Clark Gable kind of a thing going on here. And he's smoking an old-fashioned pipe as well. Commissioner, even in his loneliness and frustration, looking incredibly dapper. This police commissioner, he's got some swag. So he hears a tapping at the door of his place. And the caption tells us, in the absence of his daughter, he's discovered things about himself of which he has never been aware. He's learned that he has lived for 2 things and 2 things only. The first was his child, the second his work. Or more appropriately, the first was his child, the second his work! Exclamation point. With the loss of that which he's loved most, his life has quite suddenly become a thing of little value. So he opens the door now, and his eyes get huge, and he says, "Oh my God." Or perhaps the person or creature he's seeing says, "Oh my God." It's hard to tell the way the lettering is being done here because there's no tail connected to the balloon. Anyway, somebody says, "Oh my God!" Exclamation point. He simply can't imagine how he could continue without her. And then now suddenly we see a zombie-looking woman, I guess, that I think is supposed to resemble his daughter, but strangely, she looks to be the same height as him or even taller, which doesn't really make sense unless zombies get taller for some reason. I don't really quite get that, but seems like maybe a mistake. But who's got time to get people to redraw things on a monthly schedule? We got to get these books out. So this zombie that's supposed to be his daughter is reaching out toward the commissioner. The putrescent, gassy stench assaults his senses first. His throat burns and his stomach lurches as he gazes into the face of sheer abject terror, the face of the rotting, stinking, maggot-infested thing that once was his only child. Goodness gracious. And the zombie says, "Daddy!" Worse, much worse than the horrible grisly visage is the knowledge that this abhorrent nightmare was and is his beloved Lisa. By the way, I'm pretty sure the word visage appears about 5, 6, 7 times in this one issue. Visage appears to be a favorite word of either Robin Snyder or Bill Dubay. So from here, after this little zombie encounter with his daughter, we cut back to Mr. Justice. He's flying around with that crazy hot pink sky behind him, and now he's diving into the water. And he says, "The answers I seek somehow," he thinks to himself, "somehow are connected to what remains of my castle. I know neither how or why, only that I must return to my former prison to now save my soul from oblivion." And so he's underwater now, and it's actually a really, really cool panel, kind of reminiscent of like Jack Kirby's Eternals or something is what it reminds me of, because he's upside down underwater. He's actually upside down on this whole page. And in fact, so are the word balloons. And although I think it's quite striking that this is all upside down, I'm fairly certain it's a mistake in the printing. Because if you look at it and you turn the page over, it actually makes a lot more sense because you see him breaking through the water and kind of swimming down towards something, and then he discovers that thing. So I'm virtually certain this is a printing mistake at Red Circle, but it's actually kind of a fortuitous one because it's one of the only pages where it kind of works creatively. You're like, oh, he's going underwater. Everything's topsy-turvy. Like, it's even upside down. But the reason I definitely don't think this is intentional is just that the word balloons are also upside down, and that just looks too awkward. I mean, I get if Mr. Justice is going to be upside down and he's swimming around upside down, but like, it just doesn't make sense. The word balloons being upside down combined with the progression of the panels as such, I would bet money this is just a printing mistake. Again, hey, like Red Circle Comics, they were launching a line. They were probably juggling a lot of stuff over there, and it's hard to get the trains to run on time and make sure that the pages are printed the right way up. Things happen, shit happens. So. Still a beautiful page, a gorgeous page. And so underwater, Mr. Justice says, "By the lords of ethereal darkness, the stones of my castle have been disturbed. I sense the residue of a malevolent presence, one that wishes the destruction of my soul." Oh yeah, and so he's looking at this giant stone head underwater. And it's a beautiful panel. And this is what I was saying, reminded me of Kirby's Eternals. Or just like any of the stories where Kirby was dealing with ancient gods, like the Celestials and just these giant god type figures. Mr. Justice is just like floating in the water, staring at this massive stone looking head that looks like some ancient god. And I suppose it's a piece of his castle. But it's kind of a crazy looking piece of a castle, to have come, I don't know, like it doesn't look like what I'd picture would be part of a castle, but whatever. It looks cool. It looks really cool. So then the next page, before the startled specter can act, the hideous stone visage there's that word again, opens its yawning jaws. An unearthly scream floods the watery environs. Hey, props for using the word environs. And an awesome force unlike any known within the physical universe sucks the astral voyager within. So now he's being sucked literally into the mouth of this stone kind of looking giant ancient god face type of a thing. And so he's sucked to the mouth of this thing, and Mr. Justice says, no, 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 no way I can escape. And then we hear a sound effect saying, yee! And we have a visual cut, a match cut, if you will, to borrow some cinematic terminology. There's a visual match cut from the mouth of this ancient stone god underwater to close on the mouth of a little girl who is the one, in fact, screaming, yee! And it's the same little girl that we caught a glimpse of earlier. And there's just a bunch of panels of her screaming. And we, see her sitting alone with little red overalls on. And we, on the next page, find out the scream tapers to an oppressive silence, the awesome deafening quiet, which always heralds the onset of a nightmare. And now we're in someone's house again. I think we're back at the commissioner's place. A torpid stench lays thickly upon the still summer air, and the nightmare becomes brutal reality in the quiet suburban home of John Samuels Burke, commissioner of New York City Police. And we have just what looks like a bunch of slimy kind of footsteps that are multicolored here. I think it's the path where the zombie had been walking the last time we were here. And commissioner is, he appears to be sobbing, maybe on the ground somewhere. It's hard to tell because, again, these panels are very claustrophobic on some of these pages, so it's hard to really orient yourself in terms of the blocking and the location of some of these characters. But we're just super close on the commissioner's face. He's sobbing and he's saying, forgive me, baby, forgive me, please, please forgive me. And then there's a little panel of a picture on a nightstand, which I think ostensibly is his daughter. And then from there, we cut back to the other little girl screaming, which is in fact not his daughter. It's some other little girl. And suddenly the stillness is shattered by a little girl clawing her way from the depths of a dunning nightmare. And I'm pretty sure this is just a typo because I looked up the word dunning just to make sure that I was not being ignorant here. But I'm pretty sure that most likely this was supposed to be a dawning nightmare, as in a nightmare was dawning, I suppose. That's the closest word I could think of, because the word they use is dunning. And if you look up the definition of dunning, it's in business and accounting. It's the process of methodically communicating with customers to collect overdue payments or accounts receivable, which I'm pretty sure has nothing to do with this little girl's nightmare. So I'm going to call that a typo. So unnamed letterer, the letterer who shall not be named, checking in with a little typo here, which honestly was relatively rare back in the days of hand lettering, those wonderful halcyon days of hand lettering in American comics. And I would say, in my view, as I've observed, typos have become far more prevalent ever since the advent of font lettering over the last couple decades. And I think it has a lot to do with the amount of care that the old hand letterers brought to their craft. For the most part, you just didn't see guys like John Workman or Todd Klein or Bob Lappin or Gaspar Saladino. You didn't see them tripping up and having typos that often, hardly at all. But I feel like I see typos constantly in modern comics, and it's depressing. It's one of the many, many very depressing parts of font lettering, the scourge that has afflicted American comics in the last 20 years, which is so deeply depressing. But I don't want to get sidetracked by my strong feelings on that right now. But anyways, here we've got this little girl clawing her way from the depths of a dunning nightmare. And the sound effect continues. It's a scream heard not only within the realm of the physical, but within the lower astral spheres, haunted by the twisted denizens of a malicious spectral reality. And now we see some parents popping in the kid's room. Melissa, baby, what is it? So this is not the commissioner's daughter, Lisa. This is another little girl named Melissa, just to keep this clear. Okay, Melissa, baby, what is it? And this little girl says, sob, don't let it get me, mommy. Don't let it take me away. And I think the mom says, baby, it's all right. It's only a bad dream. You know, dreams can't hurt you. And the dad says, I don't like this, Carol. She's been having these nightmares too often. And of course, every bit of this dialogue has an exclamation point at the end of it. with the exception of the mom saying, "What is it?" Everything else is all just, I don't like this, Carol. She's been having these nightmares too often. And the mom's even yelling at the daughter, "You know dreams can't hurt you. It's only a bad dream." Yeah, these exclamation points are wild. I mean, I know this was a Stan Lee thing. I know it was a Marvel Comics thing, but I just did not remember comics in the 80s being quite this histrionic, hysterical, just in terms of the narration. I think this was maybe perhaps it was a Robin Snyder or a Bill Dubay thing. Maybe it was a Rich Buckler thing. Maybe Rich Buckler, as kind of the big kahuna of this line, decided like he wanted to recapture some of that 1960s Marvel magic. And maybe he thought it was the exclamation points that were the secret sauce that, gave those early Marvel comics their juice. Maybe he thought he cracked the code. We needed more exclamation points. Well, did not seem to work with the Red Circle line, but I'm just reporting to y'all what I see here. So here on the next page, we have a fascinating bit of design work where the whole half of this page, actually 2/3 of this page, is devoted to an exterior shot of this home where this kid Melissa is having this nightmare. And we have trees in the extreme foreground, a whole bunch of gnarled kind of trees in the foreground. The house is just barely seen through the trees. The interesting thing, though, is the trees are not rendered. They're all in silhouette. And this, to me, looks like a clever time-saving technique from Von Eeden and perhaps also Niño as well. I mean, who knows? Maybe Von Eeden did draw the trees and Niño decided just to silhouette them because he had to make the deadline. One way or another, this seems like some comic artist trickery to me. And these guys are skilled enough to make it look cool and stylistic, but it looks like drawing this page took significantly less time than most of the other pages in this issue, because most of it's just a frickin' tree silhouette that they probably knocked out in about 5 minutes. And that's, most of the page. But hey, whatever. It's cool design. Looks cool. It's not like it's John Byrne's Snowblind issue of Alpha Flight, where the whole thing is mostly white panels. I mean, I think nothing approaches that in terms of sheer craziness. But it's reminiscent of that to me. So anyways, over this blank silhouette of the trees, we have a whole bunch of text. And maybe that was part of the thinking too, is like the script is so verbose. We need some space for all these, lengthy captions. The captions say, the parents of little Melissa Shaver sense that something's terribly wrong. That some force outside the realm of their experience, their knowledge, is haunting their little girl, striving relentlessly to gnaw its way into the terrified child's soul. Yet within their idyllic Connecticut existence, their material-strewn middle-class reality, ghosts, ghouls, demons, and malevolent souls of the living dead are as mythic and intangible as a child's fleeting dreams. Richard and Carol Shavers ignore their inexplicable pangs of apprehension, hoping to latch upon a far more tangible, more organic reason for their daughter's torment. Cut back to Mr. Justice in some psychedelic netherworld, where the colors are hot pink, hot orange, hot yellow, and purple. And he's got his cape and his zombie-like appearance himself, and he's swooping into this netherworld where we saw he zoomed into there, or he was sucked into there through the mouth of that underwater statue face. And now Mr. Justice here is thinking to himself, I've been swept into the lower astral planes, that level of reality haunted by the most wretched entities in all creation. They sense my presence and draw near to drain my life force like the spectral parasites they are. And then we get a crazy full page of just Trevor Von Eeden and Alex Niño going a little nuts with a bunch of like little crazy looking demon creatures that look kind of cute, kind of creepy. It's not the greatest design work, honestly. Like they look kind of silly, but they're kind of charming. It's like these really weird little, it almost looks like, I don't know, it looks like we're looking at like little like extreme like microscopic bacteria with like mean faces on them or something. It's just like, it's a bunch of like, demon looking creatures, very, very goofy looking, but a little creepy too, a little psychedelic. So we see Mr. Justice in the middle of all these kind of creepy looking things, and they're all swirling around him, coming at him. And he's thinking to himself, quite calmly, as his cape is artfully wrapping around him, he's thinking to himself, the earthly force which swept me here is far more powerful than any I've ever encountered. It understands that these soul sappers could like a swarming sea of voracious piranha, shred my very being into non-existence. Piranha, by the way, misspelled, missing an H. Not the end of the world, but it is, alas, another typo. So on the next page, Mr. Justice raises his hands. He's got some kind of like super powery thing he's going to do. Looks like some energy blast type of thing is kind of coming out of his hands. And he thinks to himself, but my unknown adversary has tipped his hand. His ignorance of the 7 spectral planes of existence has betrayed him. Had he even an inkling of the higher realms, he would have known that the entities like myself dwelling there are far superior to these base parasites who must engulf the essence of lesser life forms to survive. Okay, so they're parasites, all right? So I said they look kind of like bacteria under a microscope. So yeah, kind of like, not too far off there. So that's what we're looking at here, is some parasites in this spectral world, as he says. And so he just goes like, Paffoom, another wacky sound effect, I guess, to blow up a bunch of parasites. He goes paffoom as he hits him with some kind of a blast, and he turns away and thinks to himself, such ignorance can only mean that my unknown, unseen opponent is one with the physical world, a powerful, cunning master of metaphysical forces, but a master with much to learn of the cosmic all. Okay, so there's a lot being assumed by Mr. Justice here about his purported enemy and what's going on here, but that's fine. It's just a lot of assumption going on in the storytelling, and the whole thing here is like it's very Doctor Strange adjacent. It's kind of like Mr. Justice is somewhere between the Spectre and Doctor Strange, because he's sort of trafficking in these very Steve Ditko-esque kind of like just psychedelic weird worlds, and now coming out of them, and he comes out of them and we just got a bunch of rubble around him. Not sure where he is exactly. I think he's coming back to Earth on the next page. It's a really beautiful page of Mr. Justice kind of like just doing what he does, thinking ponderous thoughts as he flies, which is really, frankly, most of this issue is him just flying around thinking sad, ponderous thoughts about his sad life, and ruminating on who this mysterious foe might be that he believes is trying to do something to him right now. And so he's thinking on the next page, his sociopathic one-dimensional gamesmanship is indicative of his twisted one-dimensional intellect. And while his motives remain a mystery, it's clear that he is somehow knowledgeable of my past, and therein may lay the snare which will prove his undoing. Once I was free of this prison, I had no wish to lay eyes upon it again. Now, however, the ruins of my former castle serve an important purpose. Okay, so he's underwater. That's what's happened. He's come out of this weird netherworld, and he's underwater with like the rubble of his castle floating around him. And so he says, the ruins of my former castle serve an important purpose. And then the caption alerts us that with mere will alone, the Royal Wraith raises the stones of his ancient abode from the sea. Wow, that is some willpower there. Transporting them en masse above the waves, they come together as they had been for more than 5 centuries in a garden paradise, this time on the golden shores of North America. Wow. So Mr. Justice has just taken all of the rubble at the bottom of the ocean that was the disassembled pieces of his castle, which he had formerly been imprisoned in as a, spirit. And now that he's got his corporeal form back, and he believes he needs this castle reassembled, he does it with his mind, with his power. Somehow he takes all these stones and reassembles the castle, and it looks beautiful once again here on the shores, golden shores of North America. And he thinks to himself as he floats over his newly reassembled castle, it will serve as a magnet to lure my antagonist out of hiding. There, an astral presence, pulled to the castle it remembers so well. So it seems like it happens like instantaneously. This little trap that he's laid for his opponent works within seconds. And then, zap, we see some kind of energy in front of him. And then we get an awesomely rendered close-up with just beautiful line work from Von Eeden and Niño. We're close on a profile of Mr. Justice on the next page. And he says, it sees me, senses me, and flees in mindless panic. It knows that I cannot allow it to survive. The awful stench of a charred soul permeates the very atmosphere. A soul so vile, so offensive, it sickens the relentless wraith to the core. That's kind of clever right there. They've been calling him the Royal Wraith this whole time, but suddenly we switch it up and he's the relentless wraith. I like that. It doesn't exactly roll off the tongue as easily, but I appreciate the switch up. Yet he knows he cannot give up the chase, though it leads across the savage seas, deep into his native England, to the sacred ground once ruled by he and his forebears, into the very resting place of those he'd once called brothers in arms. Only when he sees the tombstones does he understand why he's been led to this hallowed ground. So here, after reassembling his castle in North America, he says, like, he sees this little energy blast and then he smells it. It's awful stench. It takes away because he senses the energy, whatever it is panicked. And yet he cannot give up chase. So he chases it all the way across the oceans back to his native England, to the sacred ground once ruled by he and his forebears, where there's the graves of the people who betrayed him and killed him 5 centuries ago. And this is wild because why did we bother reassembling the castle in North America if we're going to go back to England? I don't know. This seems like ridiculous. Like, why didn't he just reassemble the castle in England in the first place? I don't know. Comics. Maybe they need the castle to be in America because Rich Buckler is planning for the castle to be the next, secret headquarters for the mighty Crusaders in this expanding Red Circle universe that would never come to be. Maybe there was a larger plan at work here, but this just seems a little absurd that he's reassembled the castle on one continent and then immediately has to fly back to England anyways. Okay, so he goes back to where his old friends who betrayed him are buried, and then he hears sounds in one of these graves, and he says, he thinks to himself, those muffled sounds, scratching, clawing, coming from beyond death itself. And then all of a sudden, with understanding comes the most terrifying revelation of all. Through the all-pervasive hatred, the soul-sickening evil of his monstrously demented adversary, he senses its true identity. And then here's where Mr. Justice is more upset than we've ever seen him. He looks kind of like the rattled wraith all of a sudden. And he's saying, with a whole bunch of stutters here, he's saying, no, not you. No, not you. It is the one soul who could turn my brothers against me. Of all my myriad enemies, I never suspected. And then we see a gnarled, kind of claw-like hand, a hand with a bunch of kind of nails and fingers looking all twisted, reaching up through the dirt of the grave. And he says, and because I ill suspected such treachery, my life, my world was forfeit by those closest to my heart. And here we turn the page and we have this creature, or a couple of creatures, lurching out of these graves, just crawling up out of the ground. And Mr. Justice is standing, staring at them. And this is one of the most gorgeous pages in the whole issue. And it's got just incredibly novel panel construction. It's just, the panels are just really bizarrely, but quite dramatically shaped. It's like, there's almost like an arrowhead of panels going down the center of the page where everything's kind of triangular and just really jagged looking, pointy and just odd, very odd panel construction, but it looks dope. I mean, it looks super cool. And the colors are just going off. The colors are wild. B. Grossman is just really just on another level here. We got a hot pink in the background in panel 1 here that is just blinding. And the rest of the page also just really, the colors are just out of this world. So intense. Vivid, just, I love it, but they're like searing my eyes. So he's looking at these zombies crawling up out of the grave. He says, once again, you are commanded to destroy me. Angus, my squire. And then he hits this zombie with a crazy blast. And then he says, Malcolm, my knightly compatriot. And he hits more of them with a blast. And Mr. Justice is looking scary AF right now. He's suddenly looking like he might be the bad guy himself here. He's looking a little psychotic. And then he yells, Seward, my tutor. So finally, and then, someone else gets hit with a blast, some other zombie. And then he says, and you, most treacherous of all, my brother. And Mr. Justice looks fucking upset right here. Like, we're super close on his face. He looks just wild. And, you would be upset too, I guess, if you saw your brother who betrayed you 5 centuries ago and like you'd been in prison for most of that time. And then he crawled up out of a grave and reminded you of his duplicitous nature and all that. I get it, Mr. Justice. I'd be a little peeved, maybe a little more than peeved. I understand. The wrathful Wraith, perhaps. Yeah. He's, the Wraith, the Wraith desiring some kind of comeuppance, some kind of justice, if you will. Mr. Justice, that's what he's looking for. I get it. I feel you, Mr. Justice. That's what we all want in this world that we are stuck in with very little justice. That's why we need the Royal Wraith. And so he goes on to say, would that you were more than would that you were more than mere deteriorated husks, so my vengeance could be heartfelt. But she who used you then clutches to that senile hope that you could destroy me a second time. Again, her narrow vision betrays her, and she knows. Okay, so it's not even about these zombies. It's about someone else who's commanding these zombies just the same way she commanded them when they were alive centuries ago. So we got a little twist coming up here. What's going on? Mr. Justice seems to know something, and he's flying off, following this little energy ball into a blood red sky here, which is crazy. If this was a couple of years later, you might have thought this was a Crisis on Infinite Earths tie-in book, with the red skies and all that in the background, like those tie-in issues where, some of them over at DC during Crisis, like nothing Crisis related was happening except for some red skies. Well, that's what we see here. But of course, this is pre-Crisis, and it's not DC. It's just a red sky because B. Grossman loves them colors. So he's flying off into the sky with some beautifully rendered clouds underneath him. Again, Von Eeden and Niño just going off in these final pages. And Von Eeden deserves a special shout out because these page designs, these panel layouts are wild. They're just incredibly just progressive and unusual. The panel designs on some of these pages are literally utterly singular, one of a kind. You would not be able to find a single comic book page ever in the history of comics before or since that had these exact panel shapes in this order. They are that unique. And I think it's just brilliant. It's a testament to Von Eden's experimentation. And, something I think I remarked upon before about Trevor, I think it was during our thriller episode, was just that Von Eeden had a level of restlessness and inventiveness to the way that he constructed comic book pages and the way that he engaged in storytelling, where it felt like he was just coming up with a new method of storytelling, sometimes every page, and then just throwing it away and moving on to invent some other new and even more inventive storytelling mechanic or panel design or idea. Just an abundance of massively creative ideas. And it's really just so cool to see that. And I think in the hands of a lesser artist, it might seem self-indulgent or like it didn't serve the story somehow. But I think that Von Eeden had this incredible balance of being artistically experimental, yet at the same time doing it in a way that he knew was going to work. And it was not just because he thought, ooh, I want to do some cool panel designs. Like, it actually adds to the velocity and the momentum of what's happening. And he seems to save some of his craziest designs in the pages for the times when we're hitting an emotional catharsis and an action scene or a violent catharsis of some sort, where the velocity and the movement of these panels actually adds to the read. So anyways, it's brilliant stuff. I would urge all you guys to seek out this issue and kind of see what I'm talking about in detail and just be able to stare at it, because it's really gorgeous work. All right, just to wrap up this whole story though. So he's following this energy ball. He's flying through the air. That soon her soul must return to the flesh. So he's following the little energy ball of soul energy, whatever it is. The caption tells us, the angered apparition. I like the alliteration there. I see you, Dubé and Snyder. I dig it. The angered apparition streaks tirelessly in pursuit of the disembodied horror back over the chill Atlantic. God, this guy, man, he flies over the oceans more than any hero I know, just back and forth, back and forth. Must be burning an insane amount of calories. I feel like this should be like some Wally West Flash type of shit where the final pages should just be Mr. Justice just eating. He's been flying around so much, man. The guy's got to be starving. But I guess then again, the Royal Wraith probably doesn't need to eat, doesn't need to sleep. Yeah, what am I thinking? He's been around for 5 centuries. Like, yeah, he's just, he exists. He doesn't need these things that we all need: food, sleep, all these annoying things. But he's thinking to himself, well, when that time comes, we will meet face to face after 5 bitter centuries of enmity for the final inevitable confrontation. Over the filth-cluttered streets of aging New York City, dodging, twisting, diving through the concrete canyons, feeling the sheer, unutterable panic of the astrally projected soul as it hastens in a desperate bid to evade him toward the one place it knows. Its stalker will be too preoccupied to continue the hunt. And now we see Mr. Justice somehow making his way back to the police commissioner, just appearing behind him. And the commissioner, looking again very debonair, says, Mr. Justice, you know, don't you, about my daughter? And the commissioner says, when she stepped through the door, I only wanted to take her in my arms, to hold her, to comfort her. This is the creepy zombie that appeared at his door that we saw earlier that he's talking about. Instead, I doubt I'll ever sleep soundly again. As the commissioner's voice cracks under the strain, the awful truth forces its way into The awful truth forces its way into wrath-filled Wraith's consciousness. Wrath-filled Wraith. Okay? The wrath-filled Wraith's consciousness is taking in this awful truth. And close on Mr. Justice, I think. This is a kind of a bizarre close-up. His face looks very odd. And he thinks to himself, she knows about Lisa Burke and more. I sense there is another whose innocent young soul she's trying to steal. And then we see this little girl who's not Lisa, this other little girl, Melissa, sitting down for like a turkey dinner with her family, strangely. And we see her in another panel, and Mr. Justice is saying, I sense there is another whose innocent young soul she is trying to steal. Again, this mysterious she, this mysterious kind of uber villain that he keeps referring to obliquely. And Mr. Justice thinks, again, a terrified child who no more understands what's happening to her than did Lisa Burke when, for whatever reason, her possession failed. Compassionless, self-serving soul sucker, come, lead me on the chase. And then he goes and he flies out after this energy ball again, which leads him right to this little girl Melissa's turkey dinner. And Mr. Justice kind of barges right in on the turkey dinner. He's looking pretty creepy himself with his cape and all that. And he says, show me your evil while trying to elude me. It can only add fire to my already raging fury. You know he's pissed now because for the first time, he's like talking this shit out loud instead of just thinking it to himself. He's like barking at this energy ball. He's like, come on, fuck with me. Come on. What are we doing here? Let's get it going. Come on. And so show me your evil. He's screaming with exclamation points. And then we see the little girl and she looks freaked out. Turkey dinner, but like wine glasses are spilled, which I think connotes something bad has happened here. And then we cut to an exterior shot of the house. And this house, I believe it's the same house. Is this the same house? Might be a different house, actually. A little confusing storytelling going on here, people. But we cut to a really beautiful exterior. It looks like it's just like a giant haunted mansion. Looks like, the kind of house that creepy things must be happening in. Calls to mind like just some creepy, deserted Gothic home, Pit and the Pendulum style, that kind of shit, that kind of vibe. We're looking at this really creepy house on a half-page spread. And now the captions tell us the house has stood overlooking the once beautiful hills of Connecticut for more than 2 secluded centuries. In that time, the hills, like the twisted entity within, have slowly withered and decayed as though unable to live near such heinous, all-consuming evil. In the more than 200 years of the house's existence, 7 consummately faithful and exceptionally well-paid caretakers have tended the wants and needs of the monster within. And then here we see a butler or something saying, Madam, and he's caring for somebody, and he's caring for an old woman who looks really creepy and she looks super, super creepy. And she's there, and this kind of like Alfred style butler is staring at her in some silent panels. And he says, or the caption says, each, referring to the 7 caretakers. Each of these caretakers in his lifetime suspected that he would be the last of his line, and each in their turn was astonished to find himself upon his deathbed long before the mistress of the house was, as they say, willing to give up the ghost. Henry Watson Javits also suspects that he is to be the last to serve this brittle, dried-up mockery of humanity. His tenure has lasted a mere 3.5 decades. In that time, he hasn't once seen his employer leave her bed, though, like his predecessors, he has frequently and erroneously believed her to have departed the realm of the living. And we're just catching glimpses of what looks to be a very old, very decrepit old lady with hardly any hair on her head, looking very sickly. And we're just catching little glimpses of her as we're kind of moving our camera angle, so to speak, around this bedroom where she's lying in this old-fashioned bed. And he's looking at her, and the butler, the Alfred style dude, is thinking to himself, these trances, they're what's kept her alive. I know it. The old prune, she just sits and stares. It's as though her soul has left her body. After all these years, it still terrifies me to watch her. I've got to get a drink before she regains consciousness. And then that's the whole scene there. We cut back to Mr. Justice, the astral avenger, can sense the soul entity's wariness, as once again he's chasing this little energy ball through the sky in some hastily rendered panels here that are mostly kind of like silhouetted or blanked out. He knows that despite its desperation to avoid him, it must return to its physical body. Okay, all right, we're coming up on a conclusion here. The big final climax, story's almost over. Both beings, good and evil, understand that their Homeric clash is entering its final stages. Wow, Homeric clash? Is that a Homer reference in Red Circle superhero comics? All right, okay. This has felt like an odyssey of sorts, if you will. This is a longer story than I realized. I think this is like damn near 30 pages. Again, this really points to the value that one got in comics back in the 80s, even though, yes, it was a whole $1.50 back then. I mean, this is still quite a complete meal of a story, I got to tell you. All right, we got some great final panels here of Mr. Justice chasing his energy ball through the sky. The captions as he's leading, the energy ball is leading Mr. Justice toward the creepy house. The captions read, "The corrupt soul life convulses a final time in a spasming attempt to elude its pursuer. Then, exhausted, it shudders in resignation and streaks homeward to its corporeal essence. The full meaning of its retreat lost on neither adversary. And Mr. Justice and the energy ball both disappear into the walls of the house, just shoom." Strangely, there's no sound effect when this happens, but they disappear into the house. And here we have an absolutely stunning page, and the colors are insane. The panels are insane. It's a bunch of just micro panel close-ups. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Are you kidding me? Are you freaking kidding me? There's 18 panels on this page, and it is just exquisite. It's jaw-dropping. It's Mr. Justice standing in front of this old-timey kind of canopied 4-poster bed that this old kind of, this crumpled, just feeble, zombie-looking old lady is in this bed. Mr. Justice is standing in front of the bed as this energy ball descends into the bed and into this woman's body. And we got a couple of silent panels where he's just like giving her a hard look, just like real, like narrow kind of mad dog kind of look. He's mad dogging her, Mr. Justice is like, he's got some like, presence. And when he wants to give you a hard look, he knows how to do it, this guy. He's intimidating. But apparently not to this like decrepit zombie woman, because her first line as the soul essence re-enters her body, she looks right at him and she says, "Damn your soul," which is not a nice way to greet somebody. Just for the record, if you see somebody, especially somebody you haven't seen for a long time, "damn your soul" is not the nicest way to reacquaint yourself with anyone, regardless of, what's happened before. And so here we get our big final reveal as Mr. Justice says, "Why, Esmeralda? I have to know." Dun, dun, dun. And so now we know the person who betrayed Mr. Justice all those years ago, who got his compatriots to go against him, who got his own brother to conspire against him and kill him, the one who betrayed him was that long lost love of his life, Esmeralda, the woman that we saw him in that first flashback that he had way back on page 5 or 6 or whatever, the woman he was riding around on horses with, and that he was all like, sad and like misty eyed, remembering how much he's loved her for over 5 centuries. And now, what a betrayal. What a sad, sad, heartbreaking betrayal. And so he's asking her, why? Why, Esmeralda? I have to know. No wonder the Royal Wraith is so pissed. No wonder he killed those bank robbers back then. This is a guy who's dealt with a lot. He's dealt with a lot of shit. Frank Castle, the Punisher, has his reasons for being angry. Obviously his family was gunned down in a park. That's terrible. But Frank Castle wasn't imprisoned in a castle for over 5 centuries, and he wasn't betrayed by the love of his life. Not to compare tragedies, not to compare traumas. I realize that's not a good thing to do. We don't need to play tragedy Olympics here. But I just want to say, Mr. Justice here, he's been through a lot. So this is very, very heartrending. And so I'm with him. I feel him when he says, why? Why, Esmeralda? I have to know. And she says to him, 500 years, and you're as blind now as you were then. I loved you, James. Okay, I didn't expect that. And then we suddenly get these flashback panels that are just brilliant and beautiful, where we, in quick, silent panels, we see each of them young and beautiful in old-timey medieval garb as they once looked. And then we go back to her looking like this withered, gnarled zombie. And then she continues, but love wasn't enough. I needed power, immortality. I traded your life to another being in exchange for never knowing death. But it cheated me. It let time ravage my body for 5 agonizing centuries. My physical form shriveled, wrinkled, putrefied. I've been confined to a living hell. And Mr. Justice responds, of your own making. Bravo. Bravo, Mr. Justice, for not giving in to her sob story. Because you know what? When someone betrays you and gets you killed, you don't need to worry about their pain, all right? And I'm proud of my man, Mr. Justice, here for not budging, for not giving an inch. And I got to say, this page is just absolutely fucking masterful. Man, I would love to own this page of art. I'd love to own the colors, too, on this, like a colored, like this actual page, like a colored version of this page. Wow, this is just a genuinely stunning page. And the storytelling is actually so smart. In all these little 18 panels here, again, Von Eeden is slowing down time in this comic for effect. It's not for no reason. Because even when this woman is going on her monologue, her supposed sob story about how she made this deal with the devil, kind of, sort of, with a nether being, and tried to trade her lover's life so she could have immortality. When she's laying out the sob story, there's a brilliant panel of Mr. Justice holding his head and his chin up high in a way that we haven't seen anywhere else in the issue. And the physical posture, the body language of it, to me at least, and I don't think I'm reaching here, seems to connote that he's trying to steel himself and hold on to whatever last shred of his dignity, as he's not wanting to allow himself to be swayed or taken in or affected by, what she's saying to him. And he has like an incredible nobility in this one panel. And I think it's just really subtle body language, but just exquisitely rendered by Von Eeden and Niño. And Niño's inks are incredibly ornate. And also, he seems to realize the import of this page and really slows down and seems to be taking a lot more time with his line work. And, it all just works. This page is just a jaw dropper. And the colors are just, again, wild. Like, we have so many colors going on here. Hot pink, hot red, hot yellow, hot orange, all different backgrounds, blue. And I mean, just every color you can imagine practically, but somehow it works. Somehow this really works for me. I'm with this page. The next page is one more stunner, one more jaw dropper, where you get basically almost a full page spread of close on the face of Esmeralda. And boy, she looks horrific. She looks like, boy, she's been through the ringer. She looks like she is every day old of those 5 centuries plus. She might have made that bargain for eternal life, but boy, at what a cost. She does not look good. She looks very scary. And so Mr. Justice continues this discussion here with her on this page, and we see him standing apart from her in a panel separately that has no border, no background, nothing. He is just standing with a lot of strength, standing up straight with good posture, staring right at her alone with this empty background behind him. And he has a simple question for her after he's reminded her that this living hell she's been complaining about was of her own making. His simple question to her is, "And now?" And she's got a long ass answer. This lady, she likes to talk. Her answer is, "After seeing me like this, you can't guess. I need a body. A fresh, wholesome shell in which to house my still vital mind. I've been attempting physical possession ever since I emigrated to the colonies 200 years ago. I came close with the Burke girl, but her will was so strong, she fought me, and in the end, she took her own life." So that's the commissioner's daughter, Lisa. That was the Burke girl that Esmeralda is referring to here. So she tried to possess somebody. She tried to possess the commissioner's daughter. Now, if you want to think about the level of coincidence necessary for this to happen, that the first person that Mr. Justice's former lover who betrayed him 5 centuries ago on another continent, the first person whose body she would try to possess would be the daughter of the police commissioner, who seems to work in concert with Mr. Justice in kind of a Batman Commissioner Gordon kind of a relationship. If you think too hard about the level of coincidence I think that we're expected to accept here, your brain might explode. So I would just don't even go down that pathway. Don't even think about that. A suspension of disbelief is necessary here. Because I mean, if you're going to get tripped up on that coincidence, well, then I'm sorry, you can't be reading about the adventures of the Royal Wraith. I mean, we got bigger problems and bigger fish to fry, a little coinky dink. I mean, come on, just don't even worry about that. So she goes on. She, talks about how the Burke girl took her own life after she tried to possess her. And this lady, Esmeralda, seems not entirely sympathetic or doesn't seem remorseful about this whatsoever. She says, "I was barely able to remove myself from her shell before her father." And then she doesn't finish that thought. So God knows what she was going to say. And then she goes on to say, "But I will be more successful with the young one, Melissa, and you, wandering apparition that you've become, are powerless to stop me." Well, boy, it seems like in 5 centuries plus, Esmeralda, seems like she's not really learned any kind of life lessons. She seems like she's still the same person who betrayed him all those years ago. And she goes on to say in a final panel on this page with an intense red background, intensely vivid blood red background, as Mr. Justice is turning his back on her, which is interesting. She goes on and says, "When I first learned of your existence through the Burke girl, I thought I'd have to destroy you. But I know, but you're as weak now as you were when we were lovers. You can't even face me." And she goes on now, and she turns into sort of like a weird demon face. I'm not really sure what's happening here on the next page. Her face completely changes into like suddenly just some really crazy looking red and purple demon face with red eyes and kind of like wild looking sort of demon teeth. Really not sure what's happening here, but something demonic clearly. And she goes on to scream at him, "I've beaten you again, haven't I, my charming prince? And I'll go on beating you throughout eternity because your mindless sentiment for the love we once shared won't permit you to stop me. I've won. Ha 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 ha. I've won again." Without a word, the heartsick vision turns. By the way, that's Mr. Justice, the heartsick vision. It's kind of evocative. It's kind of touching, actually, and accurate. Without a word, the heartsick vision turns, disgust embedded upon his spectral features. You can't. No, I'll kill you first. I'll. And now suddenly he seems to be doing something, and it's not entirely clear, but I think she seems to be aware of what he's doing. And the caption tells us he raises his hand in a simple gesture, and without any warning, the corporeal body of this, the only woman he's ever loved, begins to smolder, dissipate, and slowly dissolve to nothingness. My body! No! And with that, Mr. Justice runs out the room and slams the door, which seems like a charmingly mundane thing to do after you've just kind of had this sort of spiritual warfare kind of 5 centuries in the making fight with this demonic former lover who betrayed you and all this. You just got to slam the door on them, apparently, after you you take them out and cause them to smolder and dissipate into nothingness. And as he slams the door, the caption says, there's no regret in his heart, no feeling whatsoever for this consummately evil woman. He knows simply that he's freed her from the curse of eternal mortality. And then here we have a final page to our story with an entirely blood-red background, full page. And it's Mr. Justice walking through a doorway, and it's a very surreal looking page, honestly. It's very, very surreal. And we have a DeLuca effect where you see Mr. Justice's body flying in a series of drawings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 to be exact. There are 10 Mr. Justices flying across the length of this page and swirling around to the bottom right corner of the page where there's only one long strip of a single narrow vertical panel where we see the face of that little girl, which I believe is Melissa here, and Mr. Justice is flying into her mouth for some reason. And I don't really recall why he's doing this, but let's see if the captions illuminate or reveal anything that's happening here, because it's a very bizarre looking page. And so the captions say, yet he's aware as well that the material loss is one her eternal soul will never accept. The game has not yet ended. There's still a pawn that must be protected. And when that final, inevitable confrontation comes, he'll be waiting, fulfilling, justifying the very purpose of his existence, the eternal wraith, eternally watching over the innocent. Such a destiny is worth more to him than any crown could ever be. All right. That's it then. He's going to be waiting, fulfilling and justifying the purpose of his existence. He's just going to be waiting there inside that little girl's mouth, apparently. He's just going to be waiting for anyone else to come after her, and he's going to be like, bah, and pop right out of her mouth and incinerate them and cause them to, turn into a smoldering husk. That's what he does with bank robbers and ancient 5-century-old betraying lovers. So yeah, that's the wild story that is the origin and sort of the setup for Mr. Justice. I'm shocked that the character did not catch on and become the next, Spectre, Doctor Strange. I'm shocked we didn't get, hundreds of issues of Mr. Justice. I wish we did, honestly, particularly if it was going to be Von Eeden and Niño drawing. But, we didn't get that. And coming at the end of this issue, there's a text piece by Robin Snyder. But as far as I can tell, the text piece, or no, I guess it's kind of a letters page-ish. Yeah, no, it is a letters page. But it's got letters talking about The Fly, which is one of the other Red Circle comics, which we probably will cover at some point here, because The Fly was really quite interesting too. But yeah, there's letters here that have nothing to do with this comic, so we won't really talk about those. But yeah, that's it, folks. I hope you enjoyed the recounting of this little ditty. I wasn't sure if I was going to go through the whole issue, honestly, but that purple prose is just really hard for me to resist. It's just so much fun, and again, it's a lot of value for whatever money you're spending. And this is just an unreasonably beautiful comic. Looking at these pages, just page after page, there's so much cool stuff here. And I will say, Niño is a bit of an overpowering inker on Von Eeden, just in terms of the rendering. And so I don't know what Trevor thought of that necessarily. I would imagine that Trevor was a lot happier with Alex Niño than, say, Vinny Coletta. I mean, come on, like, who wouldn't be? There's no comparison there. But I am curious, because I think there's more of Trevor's work present here, certainly in the layouts, but also in some of the rendering. I think it's actually a pretty cool combination of the two men's styles. But I would say the actual rendering and line work does feel like there's a lot of Niño there, but there's also some Trevor there. So I'd be fascinated to hear from Trevor if he still had the pencils on this and what the pencils look like. They're a terrific team. And I wish we could have seen more from the two of them together. But mostly these days, I'm focused on gratitude, and I'm grateful that we got to see this issue at all. So just one of the many gems kind of hidden in the back issue bins in 80s comics that we're not likely to ever see a trade paperback or any collection of. But, it's important to keep these stories alive. I think it's important to point each other toward these little kind of hidden pieces of gold that you can find in dollar boxes across America, and hopefully cheap back issue bins all over the world. Yeah, and this is a goodie. This is really a goodie, folks. So I would highly recommend anyone seeking out Blue Ribbon Comics #2. We probably one day, like I said, we'll take a look at the first couple issues of The Fly, where you had these beautiful Steranko covers, and then James Sherman doing the art on the inside of those. And those were quite gorgeous to look at too. James Sherman kind of doing a very, Mike Parabeck, Mike Waringo sort of a style, very open, very kind of old-timey, classic, very Paul Smith looking. And I think that's worth looking at and worth remembering as well. And Blue Ribbon Comics, Rich Buckler, props for the crew he assembled. It didn't quite work out in the long run, but we got these little pieces of history left for us. And that's what we like to cover here on CRYB. So thank you, folks, for being with us. We really appreciate every single person listening to the show. And, anyone who wants to comment, please, you're welcome to. We'd love to read your thoughts on this and any other thing you want to talk about here. We respond to every comment. We do our best to, at least. And we absolutely will be back soon with more 80s comics to discuss with y'all. And that's all. So remember, if you like this episode, if you like our show, give us a like, subscribe, and also consider joining as a member for just a few bucks a month. We got a bunch of bonus episodes, and the list is growing for members only. So please chime in there. And if you got any other 80s comics you'd like to see us cover here on CRYB, please let us know. Chris and I are super open to suggestions. We have a long list of things we're going to be covering, but we're always open to anyone's ideas here. So please, that's all. Thanks to everyone, and have a great day, folks. Go